Welcome, everyone, to Sunday morning at the Marxist Forum. And we used to meet in a brick and mortar place, the Neville Proctor Marxist Library in Oakland, but now we're on Zoom. So may I say good afternoon and good evening to those of you in other time zones. We've been meeting every Sunday morning for over a decade and a half. These weekly programs are organized by the Institute for the Critical Study of Society. The ICSS is our acronym, and this session is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube, and the link will be up on our website, and that'll be up in a day or two. And our website is ICSS, the initials ICSS, Marx, all one word, MARX.org. And we invite you to visit the website. You can see our past programs and videos for them as well, and announcements for future programs. My name is Roger Harris, and I'm with the program committee. And this program committee believes in the continuing value of Marx, and not simply Marx the person, but the tradition of militant Marxism that we feel that we want to keep alive and have our speakers address. But you don't have to be a Marxist to join our programs or even to be a speaker. Before we start, I want to notify everybody that this is a comradely forum for political discourse and debate. We've worked very hard to create that type of culture in this forum, and as such, we ask you to show respect for other participants, the moderator, the speaker, and others. And please note that the opinions expressed here are those of the speaker and the participants, and not necessarily of the presenters, the ICSS. Our program today will run with our speaker will give a presentation, and she has about a half hour or so, more or less, that I think she wants to use. And then we'll take a short break for announcements, and then we'll have a robust Q&A, and that will end at about 12:30 Pacific Standard Time. The topic of our discussion is a very timely one, and our speaker is eminently qualified to speak on that. This is the election postmortem. I think probably we all were aware that we being the United States, had an election, and we're going to discuss about the prospects for the working class and the tasks ahead. And I'm so delighted to introduce our speaker, an esteemed friend and comrade, Sara Flounders. This will be her third time presenting before the library, and she is a long-standing political activist and a national left leader. She is contributing editor to the Workers' World newspaper and a leader in the United National Antiwar Coalition, that is UNAC, and she's also the chair, I think, of the International Action Center, and she is really one of the leading militants in a group called the SanctionsKill Campaign. She's the co-author or editor of numerous books, including Capitalism on a Ventilator, and also a very more recently book, Sanctions, a Wrecking Ball in a Global Economy. So without any further ado, Sara, what happened with the election, and where do we go from here?
Well, thank you, Roger, and thank you to the Marxist Forum for organizing this meeting and for keeping a whole series of challenging discussions going over several years. Now, revolutionary optimism and always looking at the big picture, I think that's what's essential. Elections are just a snapshot of public opinion at one moment, and nothing stands still. Quite frankly, if voting made any real difference, they wouldn't let us do it. So I think the first thing, for everyone here, we got to take note, fascism is not a personality disorder. The ruling class has no reason to impose a fascist dictatorship if left liberals and their confederates and their whole circle embrace a security state rather than oppose it. The slide in US politics into complete toxicity isn't based on personality. It didn't start with Trump. We have two political parties, but quite frankly, the US empire allows only one political party loyal to capitalist rule and global imperialist domination. It's a vulture with two wings. So, how do we see ourselves in this period? Are we an insignificant opposition on the edge of two political parties that have no answer and where we have no voice? Do we represent just a tiny class-conscious fraction of the US ruling class? Or are we part of the overwhelming majority of the global population who are moving in an opposite direction? When you speak and when you act, you're representing the vast majority of humanity today. The US empire has nothing to offer the world except threats. Literally, billions of humans are not looking to US imperialism at this time for anything. China, Russia, Western Asia, and Latin America. You look at the sea change in Africa, and it's certainly true for the youth in the streets in the past year, not only in the US, but the G7, the Genocide 7. You look at the youth who are in arms, they're not looking to the US. So in evaluating the elections, let's be clear that these two parties in the US offer us any meaningful choices. Neither of the two major imperialist parties offers any solution to the problems of the working class in the US, let alone the rest of humanity. And there's no technical fix for this. There's no slogan that's going to turn it around. And the elections are finally over. What's our role? It's to organize resistance and to provide perspective. Now, Donald Trump won the White House, yes, the most vile, disgusting, white supremacist, xenophobic, transphobic, ableist, misogynist, racist, neo-fascist. Yes, that's who's in the White House. The Republicans won the US Senate, maybe the US House of Representatives. And in many states, it was quite a sweep. It was catastrophic for the Democratic Party. There's lots of despair and demoralizing anger by millions who believe in the Democratic Party and who believe in this whole two-party charade. And this is where we have to separate ourselves and separate it from this mood. If Harris had won the popular vote and the stacked deck of the Electoral College, what would you have won? What would any of us have won? According to polls, only 7% of voters are enthusiastic about the direction of the US today. More than half of eligible voters, and there's so many who aren't, but more than half don't vote. I think it is essential to recognize that the Democratic Party is a graveyard of progressive movements, and it exists to suck in and grind up every progressive movement that could possibly challenge the status quo. Refusing to step into the meat grinder is a political contribution, and trying to pull others away from this two-party fraud is an essential role in our organizing. And that's our role in this period. You can't stand on the sidelines. You have to pick sides, and we also have to conduct ourselves differently. We have to organize the working class to both fight back against the offensive that Trump is preparing to carry out and step away from this crisis in the Democratic Party that no longer claims any interest in defending the working class. As a matter of fact, in these evaluations that the Democrats are going through, this soul searching, they're concluding that they were too liberal. They need to move further right, be more moderate, be at the center, drop all connection to, quote, identity politics, to representing any of those who are so deeply and specially oppressed in the US today. The Democrats had actually no program. They were silent on the horrific attacks on migrants, on LGBTQ+, especially. They did nothing to counter the transphobia. They did nothing to counter the tens of thousands of ads and attacks on migrants. And that allowed these reactionary ideas to sink deep roots into the working class over who's to blame for this crisis in the capitalist system, in imperialism today and its slide. There's a complete collapse of bourgeois liberalism, of social democracy, and let's not be part of it. They put forth no program on healthcare, student loans, education, infrastructure, climate, on the right to organize, on defense of unions. They didn't even make phony promises of tax breaks and home loans. Just fear that Trump equal fascism. On every other issue, the silence was deafening. Now, you ask yourself, why? Why is that? Because US imperialism is in deep decline. It's sliding down. And really, they all know that they have nothing to offer. 60% of the US population lives paycheck to paycheck. Weekly wages for the average worker here are lower than they were 50 years ago. And inflation is eating away at that. And they have no solutions for that, Republican or Democrat. Now, there were those who promised that voting for the Democrats would open up more space for radical struggles going forward, while the issues raised were being cut out entirely. So what's that mean ahead? The only promise they made was to consider Harris to build the most lethal military apparatus the world has ever seen, and to continue to support Israel in every campaign stop. Now, on election day, the Pentagon did an ICBM nuclear test. Why didn't they postpone it? Actually, that was the message they wanted to send on election day, that no matter who wins, the message is it's war and war preparation that are rolling forward, regardless of who's in the White House. Now, the genocide in Gaza played a really big role in the outcome, and it confirms this dialectical crisis, this huge global developments that are going in two different directions. The election was held while there was US-NATO war with Russia in Ukraine, US-Israeli genocide in Palestine, ever-expanding war in West Asia. This election was held while the US was militarily encircling and threatening China and North Korea and intensifying sanctions against Cuba and some 42 other countries around the world. But there was no mention of this or even of peace during this campaign. So the US electoral system completely fails people by not providing any choice on any of the issues of peace or the issues that are essential to people in the US today. Instead, it's racist rhetoric, name calling. Now, I want to go back to the role of Gaza and the outcome, because Gaza and the genocide are not an isolated event. The problem, the unsolvable problem, is that the US empire is losing its hegemony. Its global position is irredeemably slipping off a cliff. And Gaza reveals the extent to which US imperialism and its Zionist proxy is willing to go to defend this dying empire. Could they really withhold food, water, electricity, bomb hospitals, refugee camps, and walls of fire? Is this possible? And yet, this is the message they want to send. But let's look at the world where Trump will be president now. It's not the world of 8 years ago. That was the last Trump presidency in 2016. Trump and a whole crew of right-wing racist planners announce a drive. They are announcing it every day, every minute, to take everything backwards. But this is the time, that's why I say this is a dialectic of it. This is the time when the whole world is moving aggressively forward, and the US global position is sliding off a cliff. There is no MAGA slogan of Make America Great Again that's going to turn this around. And recognizing that is important. The only hope of the corporate elite is to take their profits out on workers here by demanding more and more and more. Now, 8 years ago, when Trump, MAGA, came in, the US was still in Afghanistan and in Iraq. Trump came in promising to end that war, as Obama did before him. Neither did. 4 years ago, the US was totally driven out of Afghanistan. This was a huge setback for US imperialism. The US effort to overturn the government of Syria that had been grinding on since the Obama administration, continued through the Trump administration, ended in a US failure and a setback. So the limits of US power were becoming all too clear around the world. That US wars won't arrest this decline of US imperialism. They actually exacerbate it. It confirms to the world the weakness and the failure of US imperialism, bloody and horrendous as it is. US NATO war in Ukraine utterly failed to achieve regime change, as President Biden promised, that the ruble would become rubble within weeks. It didn't happen. Russia is a net exporter of natural resources. Its currency is backed by tons of gold, crude oil, coal, fertilizer, grain. In early 2022, Russia pegged its currency, the ruble, to gold. US can't do that. Foreign holdings of US treasuries is steadily declining. The US no longer dominates the world supply of bonds. And the IMF and World Bank are no longer the only game in town. The economic power of China can't be denied, nor its political and social attraction. China has shown the world the ability to solve poverty and hunger. And what China has to offer in development programs and Belt and Road infrastructure to 150 countries is unmatched. Now, consider the challenge from the BRICS. The BRICS and their meeting in Kazan 2 weeks ago held more interest and more hope to the people of the world than this US election. It was hardly covered here because it confirms that the rest of the world is moving on and US power can't stop it. Now, Israel has received more US military aid than any country since World War II. It's quadrupled since October 7th of last year. And billions more for war in West Asia, all kinds of hidden aid packages to combat Yemen and Hezbollah in Lebanon. But it hasn't turned this war around. The Zionists can't turn it around. They're an absolute failure. They're in crisis. More than a year, that's the longest in the Zionist settler state's history. Now, the Biden administration pledged to support Israel unconditionally. Kamala Harris repeated this again and again, and Trump tried to outdo the support for the Israeli genocide. But all of them have failed to crush the Palestinian resistance that's expanded into Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, into Iraq, to Iran. Think of the axis of resistance. This exposes it. The US empire is not succeeding anywhere. It can make ruthless threats. They are determined to show the world the extremes of genocide they're willing to go to preserve their rule. They're not hiding it. They're not denying it. There's no crime that Israel could commit that will end the flow of arms and funds. Netanyahu will be welcomed with applause to the US Congress and to the United Nations. And international law, the ICJ, all of the courts and rulings are just out the window. Conventions on children, on that civilians can never be a target, out the window. But US imperialism and the G7, the Genocide 7, can't shut the movement down. Consider this Israeli football thugs in Amsterdam. The Dutch government, mayor of Amsterdam, they all supported the thugs and rushed the Israeli fascists onto planes and then went after the young who had resisted them. But they couldn't change that response on the streets. So now there's a phrase in peaceful negotiations that China raises. It's now part of popular terminology. It's called a win-win in choices and in negotiations. A win-win means a collaborative approach where all parties benefit from the outcome. US elections, this whole game, are a lose-lose choice. Either way, you lose. And since I'm really here to talk about the US elections, I'll repeat that the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, serve the interests of the ruling class here. They're both parties of capitalism and of war. They're both parties that use war to attempt to stall the decay of world domination. Both parties oversee devastating wars of aggression in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, have imposed coups and sanctions worldwide. It's been true for the last 50 years, last 75 years, last 200 years. So in conclusion, in 2024, both parties, they support NATO's proxy war in Ukraine against Russia. Both parties back surrounding China with air power and sea power, as well as economic war against China. Both parties support imposing sanctions on a third of the world population, more than 40 countries. It's an effort to impose starvation, artificial famine, disease, and underdevelopment. Most important is the election. It's a decisive issue, a mass issue that resonates with millions, that both parties support and arm Israel's genocide in Gaza. So what working class organizations have to prepare for is confrontation in this post-election period, no illusions, and speaking and acting in harmony with a world that, as I say, is moving on. Let's have a discussion.
Thank you, Sarah.
I don't have the answer on all things here, but I think we want to at least be honest on where we're at.
Terrific. So we're going to take a very quick break, or not actually a break, but I'd like to make some announcements. Then we'll get into the Q&A, and I'm really looking forward to that. It should be a very robust and exciting Q&A. But first, let me make a few announcements about upcoming programs. Next Sunday, we have a terrific speaker. He's John Bellamy Foster. Some of you may know him. He's the editor of the Independent Socialist magazine, the Monthly Review. He's really one of the leading intellectuals on political economy, of capitalism, on the subject of ecology and on Marxist theory. And he will be speaking. He just published an article in Monthly Review, and the title of the article is "The New Denial of Imperialism on the Left," and I think he may be speaking on that. But please join us next Sunday for John Bellamy Foster. The next Sunday, November 24, that's the traditional holiday. Some people call it Thanksgiving. Others of us call it Indigenous Peoples Day, but we'll be taking that weekend off. And then we'll be back on December 1st. And on December 1st, another close comrade and person we highly admire will be coming back to the library, and that's Baman Azad. And he will be speaking on the US and Israel, whether they're pushing the world to the brink of World War III. Hopefully the program is not too prescient, and we will be around to have that program. Baban Azad is a retired professor of economics and sociology. He is currently the president of the U.S. Peace Council, and he's a member of the Secretariat of the World Peace Council, and he's a representative of the World Peace Council at the United Nations. He's also a member of the Administrative Committee of the United National Antiwar Coalition, UNAC. Sara is also on the Administrative Committee of UNAC. And Bauman is affiliated with a very important anti-imperialist group. It's an Iranian group. It's called the 10 Mayor Group. So we'll be looking forward to welcoming Bauman on the 1st of December. And please check out our website. Again, that website is the ICSSmarks.org, and see the future programs, but also check out our videos of our past programs. So now we go into the Q&A, and as those of you who are familiar with the Marxist Forum, we have a format that we've developed over many years, and that is that we take people give people an opportunity to ask questions. So go down to the reaction part of your screen and raise your hand if you'd like to make a comment or a question. We ask people to limit their questions just to one at a time, and so that we can go around. And then if you want to have a second question, then we'll have a second round and go continue to about 12:30 Pacific Standard Time. You have about 2 minutes to make your either question or comment, and then the speaker has at a leisure will be answering all those questions. So I'm going to call on a dear comrade, Laura Wells, as our first questioner. And Sara, for your background, Laura Wells is I don't know exactly the title, but functionally she's the co-chair of the Green Party in California. I think they have it called her facilitator or something like that. And we call her Governor Wells because she ran for governor, but the voters made a terrible mistake and didn't elect her. But Laura, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Roger. The question I have is about BRICS, and that is I'm really excited about BRICS and have been. And if you could say a little bit more about it in terms of what do you think about Venezuela not having been accepted into it because of Brazil, and what is the difference between the new partners? It seems like there's a different level of membership in BRICS, just that happened just recently. And if you could, what is like a simple explanation that I might give people who don't know anything about BRICS and how it's different from the IMF and other things that the US have been involved with in terms of development in other countries? And thank you so much for your wise presentation of the big picture here.
Wow, this is a huge question on the BRICS. All right, first of all, the BRICS, as it was originally set up, and even as it has expanded now twice, originally Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, is a trade organization. It is not an entirely new economic structure. It is not a communist international, obviously. It is not a political organization. It is a group of countries saying we're going to trade with each other and set up mechanisms for doing that. And its expansion last year and again this year, they are taking concrete steps to set up not a whole currency that they feel is years away, but a way of trading major raw materials and resources with each other using banking measures that aren't going through the US SWIFT banking and are direct calculations with each other. Now, it saw itself from the beginning as expanding to include more and more countries, and it has done that. And the inclusion last time for, Iran and Saudi Arabia, Egypt, I mean, even within the region. Now, some of these countries can be allies of the US. They're not with each other on all things. And that's important to recognize too. They haven't signed, some of them are very much for keeping all doors open, and others see where the world is going. Now, what was important with Venezuela is, even though Brazil, for very narrow reasons and under US pressure, did not want to include Venezuela because of the extent of the pressure of the US to bring Venezuela down. And that's really unfortunate that Lula would make such a call, and big economic forces in Brazil. But nevertheless, it was Maduro, President Maduro of Venezuela, who was invited and who attended the BRICS meeting and was very much included. And so it was clear that ways, maybe unofficial ways, but ways that would be of concrete help and assistance to Venezuela were being found. In other words, they didn't go along with Brazil's decision to not include Venezuela. And as it turned out, Lula didn't attend. He said he fell and hit his head, maybe, but that really allowed this a certain consolidation. And it's a lifeline for Venezuela. That's pretty significant. Now, it's a lifeline that was already happening in other ways, with Iran sending shipments and of very needed soft oil that's very needed for Iranian refineries and things like that. China's assistance, Russia's assistance, all of that. Now, it functions differently, the BRICS, from the IMF. The IMF is completely US dominated by private banks, and it has to make a profit. Banks exist to make profits for their shareholders. And they really ensnare countries in unpayable loans. China's often blamed for lending too much money in Africa. Actually, 80% of the loans of African countries are still to Western banks, more than 80%. But to have low interest loans through the Belt and Road, not only through BRICS, doesn't operate really as a lending organization, but it operates, when you look at BRICS, BRICS Plus, BRICS expanded membership, and the Belt and Road, you see that there are a lot of mechanisms happening in the world today that are a radical change from where the only way to get money was ensnare yourself deeper and deeper into US unpayable debt, where they make demands. And this more collaborative, what they call win-win relationship, is of great interest all around the world. Very low interest, all sorts of equipment and whatnot coming in. There's a lot of excitement about that.
Okay, thank you. Next on the stack is Sharon, followed by Jean, followed by Raj. So Sharon, why don't you take the floor? And I know you were active in some local event, electoral issues recently, so be free to mention that as well.
Well, my question doesn't have to do with local issues, although I think they are important to talk about as well. But what I wanted to say to Sarah, thank you for being with us today. I have an opinion which I'd like to know what your reaction is. So I think you're right that the way forward is organizing the working class in resistance. And I want to just talk about the electoral aspect of that organizing. Of course, it's only one aspect of what needs to be done. But speaking about electoral politics, in my opinion, I think it is time for the left to come together in a united front to run candidates at all levels. So I'm talking about a coalition of all leftist groups, the Working Families Party, the Greens, Peace and Freedom, every other left group that we can think of. We need to have a united front and talk about running candidates at the national level and not only at the local level. And it's very hard to do. It's harder to do now than it was in the past to get on the ballot, but I think it's still an important part of a fight back. And because the Democrats, there's no hope for the so-called progressive wing of the Democratic Party. The Democrats are never, as you said, are never going to abandon neoliberalism and capital. And I was wondering what your perspective might be about that.
Well, good question. I'll give you just my opinion. Is that while you always want to be offering an alternative and an option out of the two-party system, that the elections themselves and the way in which they function are baked in to the US structure now. It's two-party system. And there is no way, we all know people who work tirelessly on ballot access, and rules would change at the last minute. And that certainly happened this year all over the country to the Greens, no matter how many thousands of signed petitions they got. So the whole structure, the idea that a vote will get you what you need, my own feeling is we have greater success at kind of the rally that takes over the state capitol, that unhinges things, that really moves in explosive ways. And we can see for the youth in the streets for Palestine, they're willing, able, and determined to go further than putting their hopes on a vote in 2 years and 4 years and politicians that always change. I mean, their experience is that all the politicians are lying. That doesn't mean that, small, single parties can't. That can be a measurement sometimes. But I think we got to think how in organizing, and that includes in union organizing. Now that takes place with elections. Yeah, it does. And so do things that happen on local levels of rent control and housing and things like that. But for the most part, I think it's a good place to put energy is more in the confrontations, that when you think back to what one gains in the union movement, civil rights movement, even the right to vote, but nevertheless, it didn't come from voting in a voting booth. It came from the streets. And this is true also with the LGBTQ struggle and the women's struggle. It's possible to even overturn Supreme Court rulings, as we found in Roe v. Wade, a reactionary court. But it was the women in the streets who made the demands. So my instinct is always to be in the streets. If a party runs, they're simply running as a list of what elections should stand for. So it's a protest vote. But the energy for all the parties to come together in one platform. I don't necessarily see that happening, or that it would be a win in the struggle at this time. We're in a time of sharp decline, really, on every front. And let's think of tactics that right now show our strength. And I don't think that's in the electoral front.
Thank you, Sarah. Next on the stack is Jean Rule, followed by Raj Sahai, and then Citizen of the Planet. So, Jean, it's all yours.
Okay. Well, thank you, Sarah, for your words. I've been looking forward to your talk, and my hopes were justified. Great talk, and I appreciate your bringing up the importance of China here. But my comment is, half of the working class are women. And I have to say, I was optimistic about Harris, partly because it would be great to have a woman as president of the United States. It's something we're lagging behind on. But also, I think Harris's closing comments address the fact of reproductive rights for women, that this is absolutely fundamental for women. And, they're going to be under attack more. I think in California, I think Governor Newsom is hopeful about passing laws that will, protect us from the worst things about Trump. But I'm again, I guess, concerned again about the rights of women, half that working class, and the Trump and. I was optimistic about Harris on that point, and I just wonder if you have a reaction on that. Again, thank you.
Well, I think a big part of the problem is that the Democratic Party, even though they promised, and actually Obama, the first time around, ran one that he would guarantee reproductive rights, and through legislature, in other words, as a way around the Supreme Court. And then, even though they had both houses of Congress and the White House, just dropped the issue and said so. Well, we're going to try to get other things through in the first 100 days, and after that, it was gone as an issue. Biden had all kinds of things he could have done, said he would do in running, and didn't do a one of them. Now, there were huge rallies for reproductive rights, giant rallies with Harris. And when you think of it, all that she promised to do, it was a giant rally in Texas. All that she promised to do is sign any legislation that came to her desk, period. I mean, it's not much of a promise, is it? So again, this is something that has to be won in the streets and not being dependent on, an election of politicians who themselves don't take it seriously. They just put it in their back pocket, knowing, oh, it's a good election issue. And that's how they treat it. That's how they treat it. And in my opinion, it couldn't have been more cynical in the way in which they handle this issue and have handled it for years now. So anyway, I think that's a real problem. There's no believable part in it anymore.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. We can go back to that, but next on the stack is Raj Sahai, followed by Citizen of the Planet, followed by Richard Wright. So, Raj, it's all yours.
Sarah, thank you very much. I appreciate your talk. I have two questions. First one is why didn't more people vote for parties that stood for socialism? There are, in particular, Peace and Freedom Party, which Katrina was the Claudia and Katrina were the candidates, and the Green Party. So that's one question. They have national, I think one has 39 states registrations. The other one is 26 or 29 or something like that. So that's one question. The second one is, I believe you call Trump a fascist. He's a reactionary, I agree with you, but you also called him fascist, if I'm not mistaken. And let me quote you from Dimitrov's 1935 definition of fascism. He calls it as the most communist, he calls it as the most, fascism as the most open terroristic dictatorship of the most reactionary, most chauvinistic, and most imperialist elements of finance capital. And just a little more, and he says further, German fascism is acting as the spearhead of international counter-revolution, as the chief instigator of imperialist war, as the initiator of a crusade against the Soviet Union, the great fatherland of the working people of the whole world. Now, today you also define China, believe China is acting in the role of socialist country with a different approach. So my question is, how is it that the most militaristic, aggressive imperialism is coming from the liberals, okay, which is the liberal side of the spectrum of bourgeois politics? And why is it that Trump, who actually agree is reactionary, but he's against wars? Or am I misreading what you said or what he represents? Those are my two questions. Thank you.
Well, I hope you're misreading what I said. What I said was fascism is not a personality disorder. I called Trump, I'm just looking at my notes here. I said he's vile, he's disgusting, he's a white supremacist, he's xenophobic, he's transphobic, he's ableist, he's misogynist, he's a racist, a rapist, and neo-fascist. That's a term. That does not mean fascism is at the doorstep. Because the ruling class has no reason to impose a fascist dictatorship if the liberals, social democrats, are going along with embracing a security state. I mean, we have seen in the past year massive number of arrests, wholesale shutdowns, and social media over thousands and thousands of accounts. You could look at what happened to the encampments on every campus in the US. This is done by the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. So while, as long as the two-party system is working very effectively, why would they go to a fascist extreme? Fascism was used historically when the working class is strong, powerful, organized, and there's no other way for the ruling class to bash it down in an extreme measure than to use really fascist tactics. So I don't think that's on the agenda because, frankly, the Democrats go along with the repression right now.
So would you say the Democrats are neo-fascists as well?
I was referring to, again, Trump's personality. They can be just as nice, but they are using repressive measures of the state to shut down dissent, to shut down solidarity, Palestine or with any country. That is different. So
I see more of a fascist
I think maybe
tendency there. Sorry,
Raj, maybe,
I just want to clarify. We have 1 second. Just want to clarify that I see more fascism on part of the Democratic Party than I see with Trump. That's all. And I just wanted to know your reaction.
I think both of them are playing the same role and say that they want to play the same role. They want to shut down dissent and our role should be in trying to elevate that on every level and to defend those who are really in the fight. That should be our role.
Great.
Any other questions that
Okay,
I
no, we're gonna have to go to the next person, so you can come. We'll come back to you, Raj. And thank you. And I should add that we really do ask you to just make one question and at a time, and then we can come back to you. But we want to go through at least the first stack and give everybody a chance to speak before we ask a second question. So on the stack now is Citizen of the Planet, followed by Richard Wright, and then Norma Harrison. So Richard Wright, Citizen of the Planet. It's all yours.
Okay, Roger, please let me know when I have 30 seconds remaining.
Okay, Alan, you'll be on that.
Okay, thank you. So Laura, I appreciated everything you said. But once again, I hear from the radical left, and I don't say that in a negative way, that the empire is collapsing. And I've been hearing that for decades. So obviously that could take a long time. And the other thing, you talk about the economic attacks on China. China has made the US middle class possible and is a major holder of US Treasury bonds. So I think, these challenges against China, the US challenges against China and North Korea, and even the US provoked proxy war in Ukraine, I think the primary purpose is to feed the US military industrial complex and thus to greatly enrich the 1% even more. I want to say about Kamala, so many people know that I'm Black American, and I was against Kamala running because I knew that the so-called swing voters were not going to elect a Black woman as president. And I said that Biden might as well stay in. And with regard to Kamala, with the greatest respect, I don't know why Roger, or was it you? It was Gene, I believe. I don't know why Gene, with the greatest respect here, seems so enamored of Kamala. I said to a Black journalist friend of mine, I never supported Obama, again, even though I'm Black. Our movement was subverted into getting Obama elected, and now it's subverted into getting Kamala elected. This was before the election. Yes, Kamala has to get elected, but now our having Kamala, just another neoliberal, corporatist, trillion-dollar militarist, imperialist, warmonger, free speech attacking, and now neo-Cold War, blank check, pro-Zionist, genocide supporting Democrat.
30 seconds. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. As the only viable alternative is nothing to cheer and celebrate. So last, I am seriously thinking of moving out of the country because I think this fascist thugocracy will cut off all avenues of dissent. And Trump will illegalize holding the police accountable. And let's see if I can wrap up here. And so I don't see any avenues of dissent available. I saw a docudrama about pre-World War II Nazi Germany, where a civil and human rights German attorney had to discover that the courts were cut off to any source of remedy and redress in pre-World War II Nazi Germany. And that's where I see the United States heading. Thank you. And of course, your response to that, Sarah, if you wish.
All right, I'm trying to think of a response because I'm trying to think of the question in your statement.
Well, it began with China making the middle class in the United States.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Roger.
Let me just try to summarize.
Yeah, no, thank you, Roger. But those were really kind of rhetorical points. But my question relates more to the fact that what I regard as this coming fascist thugocracy will cut off all avenues of dissent. And so while I didn't support Kamala, in forgive me, in basketball, there's a thing of the switch. And what you do is you try to switch on to the opponent that you want, which is a weaker opponent. You don't give up, but you use that to try to gain a score. As I said, you don't stop opposing the weaker opponent, but you use the relatively weaker opponent to be able to advance the score. So it's a cutting off of all avenues of dissent that is really my question. You know, they will own all the courts.
Well, there's certainly an effort to cut off all avenues of dissent. But I think I opened with saying, I think revolutionary optimism is an obligation of political people who are organizers and who are determined to be part of the class struggle today. Why should we concede that this might happen? It's a very different period than even a few years ago. And that is that US wars are not succeeding. Doesn't mean that they're not all militarists. Yeah, they are. And this is true for Kamala Harris. It's true for the Democratic Party as a whole. She was their face in this election. You nominate someone who you think would be the most persuasive to the voters, but it doesn't change the institution, the political party. And both political parties are for repression and war and more cutbacks. That seems to be a fact. The empire, yeah, you say you've heard for a long time the empire was collapsing. That's true, but I think now it's about falling off the cliff. It's in a stark decline in that China is economically and in many ways politically far stronger than the US. US exceeds in military only. And the only way they can impose their will on the world is using weapons and coups and sanctions. And the world is looking in another direction. So there's an intensification of the slide. Does that mean it's next year? No, I don't think so. I always for taking a long view in the process, but certainly US power, US empire is not in its dawn, it is in its death. And so it's important to understand where we are in a process. I'll also just say on China in terms of the middle class, yeah, there were all kinds of inexpensive products suddenly available from China. US corporations were only too glad to shut down every industry here and have the same done for less in China. But what will tariffs do? Tariffs raise the price on everything and do it overnight. You impose 100% tariff on goods coming from China, everything from solar to cars to widgets to all the different computer parts. They all have 100% tariff. Then everything that is made in the US will also increase because now it can. This is a boon for the capitalist owners, but it means the working people will pay much more than they think. Tariffs aren't a protection. They're a wild inflationary thing. They bring a great deal of money to the corporate owners, and they absolutely loot working people. So I don't think tariffs on China are a solution. It will make things much, much worse. But let's not write off the whole process. People can make their own decisions as to where they live in the world, but if we're living here, let's continue to organize resistance.
Very good, Sarah. Next on the stack is Richard Wright, followed by Norma Harrison, followed by Mark Corbett Wilson. So Richard, from the independent oblast of Texas.
We're fighting Greg Abbott down here. Sarah, thank you for your analysis, your presentation. I've got to say, in some respects, I agree with Citizen of the Planet that we've been hearing about this for quite a while now. Um, and it just seems to get worse. So when I looked at the election maps that were, commonly put up, there's a lot of red territory out in the counties, out in the non-urban counties, and in order to reverse this thing, and I don't think I'll be alive, to be honest with you. I think we're talking decades of work here. But how do you get how do you get out there and talk to these people who depend on the military contractors who are in every county, almost every county in the United States? How do you talk to them and get them to realize the folly of their paychecks, if you will? Thank you.
Well, I don't think you'll get very far talking to the military contractors on the folly of their ways, because it's profitable.
Not the military contractors, the people who work for them. And, I mean, there's a lot of money that is spent on the military contractors that then flows into the non-urban area, a lot of pocketbooks. There's a lot of money that's going into their pockets. How do we approach them? How do we, okay, I'll just leave it there again.
Okay. All right. Well, folks who are working for a paycheck and by the hour have no decision-making in what they're producing. That's true. And I don't think they also should be blamed. If you're working an assembly line or you're working making this or that, does it benefit the military? Almost any corporate industrial thing that's produced today benefits the military. And not going to ask people to leave the jobs they have. I don't know that this change will take decades. That's why I raised the comparison of Trump 8 years ago and how rapid the changes have been in 4 years and in the past year. I think we should think that there are dramatic and drastic and earth-shaking changes happening right now, and that have happened in the past year with this incredible resistance in Palestine and in all of West Asia. I think there are incredible changes happening at that BRICS meeting in Kazan, and the US inability to succeed in bringing down Russia. There's huge things happening in the world, and worrying about, is it in our lifetime? Well, it's happening right now. Big changes, big changes. Is it the end of the US empire tomorrow? No. But will it be a very ugly process here? Yes, it will. And we can't promise that we're going to make it better. We got to get people as organized as it's possible to be, to understand that China's not their enemy, Russia's not their enemy, Cuba or Venezuela. The work of solidarity is more important than it's ever been. And fighting immigrants, they're not the enemy. They're not the cause of what's happening. The more we're building solidarity, to blame trans people, I mean, look how ugly this election campaign was. And those who could have stood up, used the election campaign to do that, didn't. So I think we should have some introspection and actually say everything that we can do to build solidarity among humans right here, and solidarity around the world will resonate, will make a big difference. I hope I'm not trying to be general, I'm trying to be pretty specific. But thanks
Very good,
for the
Sarah.
question.
Thank you. Next up, Norma, followed by Mark, followed by Stephen. So Norma, it's all yours.
Sarah, it is such a a great relief to hear you. Thank you very much, as always. I posted in the chat that everybody should read the Communist Manifesto in order to integrate the ideas that we all think into our discussions with people, many of which you have been restating by implication in your responses. I urge people to look up the word Sumud, S-U-M-U-D. It is the basis of Palestinian thinking. They think they belong to the land. So the struggle is endless, perfect, perfectible. I tell people that Hamas is Palestinians, which are Hamas. Palestinian are Hamas. Hamas is Palestinians. The struggle is to be allowed to control where they are, their lives that they have invested in there, which the Native Americans have not been allowed to continue, and of course, many other places. As a result, we must learn not to correct other nations. We've taken upon ourselves, oh, you're not communist enough. Your communism is not appropriate. Oh, you don't support homosexuals. Oh, and they don't look at Cuba after many years, which has opened up its mentality, thinking about homosexuals to be very inclusive. And of course, this goes along with any society in strong left struggle. And we need to recognize that that's the basis for changing. You cannot get, I run for office.
Norma, you're at 2 minutes, so if you could sort of wrap up the.
Could I have another half a minute?
Absolutely.
Okay, I run for Board of Education because I say that the way that school is conducted is to continue the structure that we have about accepting the abuse that the system is as manifest by the schools. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Norma. And the ideas are based certainly on the Communist Manifesto, which has resonated around the world, and it shows that you can repress ideas all you want. They're out in the world, and they change people and they change history. And I also to agree with Samud, free the land, really is the whole concept. What the Palestinian struggle has also shown is an intense level of cooperation among very different groups who at one point did fight each other, between religious and Marxist currents, secular currents, and groups who were just in the resistance struggle itself, almost without ideology. But all of them said, we, against the Zionist occupation, are going to cooperate and use a huge variety of tactics, but they have forged themselves into one force of unity based on fighting settler colonialism. And they see the same concept in terms of what's called the axis of resistance, this cooperation intensely with Lebanon, with Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is a very important political organization, not so much a military organization that really operates in Lebanon and runs the hospitals and the schools. And the same thing with Yemen. I mean, when you look at what's happening, there is a real cooperation going on also in West Asia. And the basic concept is to be free of colonial domination. And people who are willing to do that at great sacrifice, and no matter how many bombs they're dropping, they seem unable to defeat them. And the costs are horrendous. But and your last point on the schools, really the schools operate to enforce a mentality. By the way, I think they push elections now as almost the state religion. You can't teach religion in school, but you teach everybody that the only change they can be involved in is in an election. And every 4 years or every 2 years, when they push a lever, that's their choice. And if they didn't do it, then they have only themselves to blame about this system.
Let me tell you that there's a child in high school who thinks that the two-party system has been written into the Constitution.
Right. Yeah. And the way it's treated. So thank
Very,
you.
very good. And so let's go on to the next question in the Q&A, and that's Mark. If you can take the stage, please.
Thank you. Can you find me?
Yeah, you're there.
There I am. So much to say. I just want to say I've wanted to attend the ICSS or the Marxist Library for decades, really. But now that I live in Los Angeles, here you are online. And so I finally made it. I had two things I wanted to say. I had the good fortune to stumble onto Dave Emery's radio show. He's a historian, not an analyst. He's quite explicit about that. That was trained by Mae Brussel from KPFA. And he's been on the radio for 40 years, Dave Emery, down in the South Bay. I forget the station, a little college station, but he's syndicated. And I think KPFA plays him. And now we have the internet, so you can find him. So he's been tracking first the Nazi underground, and, you know, the creation of CIA and all of that. And now, in my opinion, so after following him and others for decades, this idea of fascism, I see it as the emergence of either the continuation of the Third Reich, the Nazi underground, the creation of the Fourth Reich. I don't care what you call it. Language really breaks down when you're talking about these things. But there is an international movement that has captured corporations and governments. You know, they were very successful in South America in the 50s and 60s. And here we are promoting that ideology from our own government. So that's just my comment there. My question really is around this organizing. So all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, it seems that there are many parties being organized or attempts to organize outside of the duopoly. This to me mirrors the whole nonprofit thing where everybody creates their own nonprofit to solve a social ill. And you get to the point where there's so many different competing nonprofits that really not a lot gets done. All the resources are consumed by the organizing of the nonprofit and very little gets to the people on the ground. And so I see that sort of same phenomena now happening. So there are all kinds of communist parties and Marxist parties popping up. So my question is, and I put in the chat, I'm looking at the BRICS as an international way to organize people with competing interests, but who have a focus on one thing. In their case, of course, moving money around, which is, you know, pretty important to everybody, is how can we, and I'm even involved in one of these groups talking about organizing. So mea culpa. How do we get these groups?
Go ahead.
Okay. How do we get these groups to work together? And my one comment is I'm a retired worker. So I was a worker for 40 years. I don't have time to go into that, but now I'm retired. And when I come to leftist groups like this one, I hear the same thing that I've heard for my whole life when I go to Buddhist groups. Is just a lot of infighting, and you're incorrect in your interpretation of this line of a centuries-old text. And I think a lot of workers like me have that same reaction. So how do we get these groups to work together is my question.
You're asking the right person, because Sarah has one of the more senior people with a lot of experience, but also a lot of success at that.
Well, I don't have one solution for getting people to work together. Sorry, I don't.
Well, groups is my particular.
Yeah, groups. And some of the differences aren't important and substantial, just to be realistic about it. But I do think, like the example I gave of Palestine, that when groups find common ground and issues and ways of cooperating with each other, they can force through and make changes. So coalitions are important, and clearly defined ones are important. I also wouldn't connect political parties to nonprofits, which anything you can set up, from paying your rent to helping little, projects exist. There'll be lots of them. That's fine, but they're not necessarily organizing to make change. So no criticism of the role of nonprofits, but that's not political organizing. Whenever we can find common ground with all different people, I think things move forward. So that's about what I can say. And I'm glad you're listening on the program and connecting with other people. That's the way to do it.
Great. Okay, next up is, let me see, the list here is Stefan, followed by Judith, followed by Janet. So Stefan, it's all yours.
Roger, thank you very much. Sara Flounders, I think yours is a name that I would want to remember for a very, very long time. Thank you so much for an incredible presentation. The clarity and insight and the sense of the current reality that faces us has been amazing and incredibly useful. I cannot agree with you more in terms of various aspects of it. I want to, from this, the way I see BRICS as being one element in an emerging global reality, in a reality that is already in multiple ways ushering a new world, a new reality. In my 70 years of life, I have never, and all the political activism, I've never felt as hopeful as I do at the moment. What I see, in a sense, where BRICS is an element, in a multipolar, multilateral kind of design of world, there are many other facets in it as well. They talk of where BRICS leads a kind of changes in an economic architecture. There is a security architecture that is so much being advanced through the Russian struggle with NATO in the proxy war in Ukraine. There is also talk in terms and speakings about a global governance in which we still need international organizations. There is the immense struggle that the US and the West is waging in terms of trade architecture, trade routes, and so forth that's going on right now. And when we look at politics in the United States and in many other places, they are so localized in a way. Most of the time we are caught up with the kind of issues we cannot see that larger picture. So my question for you is part of what I ponder as well. How can our everyday actions connect and help in realizing at this contingent moment that emergence of this new world order that we so much want? Thank you.
I think ideas are powerful. Going back to Communist Manifesto of the earlier discussion. And we shouldn't underestimate our ability to provide others with hope and a way forward. We shouldn't underestimate, there's a number of older speakers on this panel. That's a lifetime of experience. So being one with those who are young and fighting right now is a big contribution. It's a big help. And defending them, defending their right to resist, no matter how, how it's denounced and shut down and demonized by the powers that be. Defending it is pretty important. I think explaining, because here it gets no coverage and yet people are interested, explaining what's happening around the world, that excites and interests a lot of people. They kind of know that the news today, they do all these polls. Do people even trust the news media here, the corporate news media? And they don't. Now, they can get a lot of fake news too, that's true. And you could say X is almost built on that, and Musk, and so, put out enough garbage out there, some of it's going to stick. I mean, enough. But nevertheless, there's actively people looking for solutions and looking for a way forward, and being able to put it in very reasonable terms that these countries are not our enemy, that we're not for endless war, and that money for endless war should be spent right here, that the people of the world and the people here are owed reparations. Even that concept changes people's thinking. Who's to blame for this situation, and how can it be rectified? I'm thinking also of the same, the famous quote, "Tell no lies, claim no easy victories." So I won't tell you there's a simple solution or an easy victory, but I do think we have a lot of resources in terms of capacity to be at one with these changes happening in the world, and not say that they're terrible. They got to be stopped. They got to be smashed down. They got to be, just standing up to that goes a long way, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. And those of you who are new to this forum, we have a convention here that we try to encourage as many people as possible to ask questions and make comments. And so if you've already made a question or made a comment, you go to the bottom of the stack, and we sort of prioritize people who haven't spoken yet. But I see some people coming back. This is great. We'll get to you, but first we want to get to Judith Osterman, followed by Janet Coburn, and then followed by Merle Sundove. So,
Yeah.
Judith, all yours.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, great.
Okay. All right. So, I would say that we already have had for a long time some aspects of fascism in this country, which is the so-called public-private partnership type of thing that they're pushing constantly, and the capture of the regulatory agencies by the industries that they're supposed to be regulating, and so on. And the union movement, as far as I know, is not being actively suppressed, but nevertheless, there is some kind of understanding that unions are supposedly not very good. They're all corrupt. They're this, they're that, and there is no positive movement towards expanding them. Okay, I just wanted to say that quickly. But the thing I wanted to ask you was the word communist, the word socialist in this country has been vilified and demonized so much that it's even worse than fascism. And according everybody who is not part of the communist socialist movement thinks that it's a really terrible thing and dictatorial and so on. So the thing is, how I see that this country is actually about to transition into a much more radical point of view. People are really waking up to the abuses of capitalism, particularly in the medical field, and I think the time is right to disabuse the public of their ideas of what communism and socialism are. So
Great question, Judith. I think you've gone a little bit over 2 minutes.
How would you go? All right. How would you go about it? That's all.
Good question.
Since you began on the regulatory agencies and their capture, and this is true, corporate America wants to capture everything and no holds bars and no control on it. So fighting for that these all different regulations represent us, that's an important fight. The union movement is being actively suppressed, and the number of labor rulings that go in toward the bosses far outnumber. And yet there's more interest now in union organizing than there has been in decades. And even of small, and you could think insignificant, but look what's happening with Starbucks. They just passed 500 store organized, and they got to do it store by store. It's not, why can't it be the whole industry? Everybody gets to vote. They compartmentalize it by federal and labor law regulations. But even with all those onerous things, I think among the youth, when they do these polls, there's more interest in unions than there has been since like the 1950s. And I think the same thing in terms of, yeah, there's a very negative connotation among the older generation with the words communism and socialism. That's true since the witch hunt, since the 1950s. Among youth, it is the most popular word that is researched online. And groups who don't even know people.
But do they know what it means?
Well, the very fact that they're looking means they want to know what it means. And why is the Communist Manifesto still one of the most popular books? You don't see it proposed anywhere in any of our schools, yet folks find it. So I think we have to really look at when this society offers nothing, humans go looking. And that is what's happening. That really is what's happening. So being confident of that and also knowing what we're seeing here is not representative of what's happening around the world.
Very good. Okay, so next up is Janet Coburn. And if you haven't made a question or comment or both, please consider joining the conversation. So Janet, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us today. As you've said, the U.S. election system is rigged against any third party. But I'd like to bring up the role they, especially the Green Party, played in this election, and also the part the Abandon Harris campaign and Muslim Americans made in the election. I voted for Jill Stein, but she didn't do well in Michigan, and she didn't get the needed 5% nationwide. I want to bring in another dimension. To me and many others, what is going on worldwide around Israel's genocide and U.S. imperialism and the role of the axis of resistance is a matter of morality. Imam Tom Fukini, one of the leaders of the Abandon Harris campaign, talks about how Muslim Americans have been gaining momentum as a bloc with the power to make a difference, with an approach that it is better to be feared than liked. he described what happened in Michigan, where Jill Stein had become very popular, was that many of those who were going to vote for her in order to not cross the red line of genocide ended up voting for Trump instead because they feared Harris might beat him there. And they thought that even though he supports Israel, he seemed like the lesser of two evils. I'll post a link to an interview with him with Imam Tom in the chat. And by the way, I recently learned that Trump's daughter, Priscilla, married a Lebanese American whose father is a Lebanese billionaire and who may play a role in the Trump administration. It also seems like Ivanka and her husband.
Tiffany?
Yes, Tiffany, right, sorry. And it seems like Ivanka and her husband, Jared Kushner, played a back seat in this latest Trump campaign. In any case, the main thing I would like you to talk about is morality in the context of Marxism. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you. Thank you, Janet. First of all, in terms of the third parties are a protest vote. It's not that there's any concept that they're going to win. It's an opportunity to put forth what are people's demands. Now, when you consider the Abandon Harris movement, and that was a strong statement saying we are not going to vote for supporter of genocide, even though these are totally democratic states and areas that have historically voted Democrat. The refusal to do it was a strong moral, political statement. Now, many people solved it just by not getting into the voting booth. It's not would they vote for Jill Stein, would they vote for Trump? They said, we're not going to take part in where there's no choice, and you're both parties, both of the imperialist parties, both of the major parties, both of the only two parties that are allowed to function are for this genocide, and we're not going to take part. So that became, I think, the stronger view. Now, what Trump is going to do based on daughters-in-law and relatives, I don't think personalities set the agenda by family. This is U.S. corporate interests have always been in maintaining an outpost, an unsinkable aircraft carrier. That's what Israel is to them. And they are not likely to let Israel go based on any personal feelings toward anyone, or that would be a better option. I think that's wishful thinking. But I do think that the Abandon Harris movement was a way of saying, well, let the ship sink. We're not going to take part in this vote for genocide of either political party. And it was a courageous stand, and for which they now are being thoroughly demonized, attacked, criticized, and blamed. Oh, you're responsible for the Trump victory. Not at all. They aren't. I think that was an important statement at this point, not to vote. So,
very good. Okay, next up is Merle Sundove, and then
what about morality in the context of Marxism?
well, I think it's the most deeply moral thing that there is, in terms of morality being the right to life, the right to a future, the right to health care and education, and the right to sharing. That capitalism itself is immoral. It's legalizing piracy and theft and land theft and expropriation. So it's immoral by its very nature. And I really do think that Marxism saying that the people have a right to decide their future and have a right to the benefits of life and healthy children. That's what morality is all about.
Very, very good. Very good. Okay, so the next speaker is Merle, and then we'll be looking forward to some of the people who've already spoken to hear back from them. And again, I encourage other people to speak as well. So Merle Sundove, it's all yours. Unmute yourself, please.
I certainly appreciated what you had to say, and was, as Stephen said, I have the same opinion that Stephen has, that it was amazing, and you speak and make things concrete so well. And I know you've over the years, I know you've published some good articles that I have read, but if you think of one that sort of puts forth the very ideas in such a concise way as what you did today, would you put that in the chat? Perhaps a link to it in the chat that I might find that out. And it's the kind of thing that gives me hope. So thank you.
Well, that's a question I love. I will suggest to everyone everything that I've written. The first place it appears is on workers.org. That's Workers World's website. And the articles that were under discussion for today and on the elections also appeared on workers.org. They get picked up around the country, around the world, but it's a good place to run it by. And we also seek to reprint there a number of other articles that catch our interest. We think, well, this is a valuable contribution. So it's not only members in Workers' World who are writing there, but other commentators in Europe. All of the Palestine statements from the Axis of Resistance, from Hamas, from PFLP, they say, you can't reprint this. How dare you? We'll fine you, we'll kill you, we'll do. We reprint them all at workers.org. Roger, who's chairing today, he writes a lot of good articles. Some of them are reprinted at workers.org. So that's the first place to look. And I'm sure others here might post their favorite places, but for me, that's my go-to. So thank you.
Very, very good. Okay, so up next are Gene Rule, Citizens of the World, and Citizens of the Planet, and Raj Dahad. But before that, we have Alan Miller. And Alan, I'll just warn you that I'll be keeping time on you. So go ahead.
All right, I have a very short question. I have several friends who are very strong supporters of the Democratic Party and Kamala's candidacy. And when I asked them what they thought of the election, they said that Trump won because of racism on the part of Trump supporters. And I was wondering if you could comment on that, what you think about that.
I think racism is absolutely part of the entire U.S. culture. It's baked in. It's the most dangerous, and there's a direct appeal to white workers to create division. What was unfortunate in this race was Trump made a direct appeal to workers on taxes, on all kinds of issues, where people ended up voting for him because they're desperate for. I talked to people, shocked me, who were migrants, immigrants, and voted for Trump. I was shocked. But he won't tax Social Security. He's not going to tax tips. That's what they heard. And that really shocked me. But it does show that the Democrats have sort of given up speaking for working people at all. And therefore, it leaves the field open. This is true. It's happening in Europe, too. Why this rise in the right wing? And that is when Social Democrats abandon the field and don't make any demands for working people. They look elsewhere in terrible places. So I do think, and it's no easy fix, because at this point, the U.S. empire and its little cronies in Europe also don't have a solution. So they can't say, oh, we're going to do this, that, and the other. No. And I think the, Democratic Party, could they have reversed this? No, they're caught. They're agents of a system. But it does leave the field open for Trump, or it leaves it open. You look at German or British politics, or almost anywhere, Italian, where it's the right wing that surges forward, but it's because the ground was conceded. And that's terrible.
Roger, would you look at the request in the chat, please?
Yes, I just saw
Okay.
that from David Paul. And so next up is Jim. And so Jim, it's all yours.
Thank you. Yeah. Back in the day, one of my favorite congresspeople was Ron Dellums. And when we would go into the streets, there would usually be some kind of a bill that he was requesting in solidarity with our demand. And I noticed that just a couple days ago, some of the people in Congress seem to be putting together a laundry list of things they might try to do before Trump gets into office. And I'm wondering how you feel about that kind of collaboration between street action and trying to get some things done there. Thank you.
Well, Jim, it's one thing to introduce a bill in Congress. The problem was when the Democrats held both houses, Congress, they got nothing passed. So I'm not sure what they're going to do in the final 100 days. I think they'll all claim it, but I don't think that's what they're going to do, even in desperation now, because they haven't shown the capacity to use their votes, use their system, use that seat in Congress to do anything really useful. They didn't get it through in 4 years. And that says a lot. But voices like Ron Dellums did used to really craft bills, but then others, even on that committee, would say, thank you very much, and shelve it. So there it sat. Didn't mean it was going to see the light of day, even into committee hearings, let alone reach the floor of Congress, let alone get passed. And that is the stranglehold, the way that Congress operates.
Okay, well, thank you. And Sarah, we have about a quarter of an hour left, about 15 minutes. We have about 6 more people to go. So,
all right.
And I know you're very, very busy, so I know that you can't stay much longer. So, just a time check on that. Next up is Lucy Rios, and that's followed by David Paul and David Campbell. Lucy, if you could unmute yourself, please. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much, Sarah. I loved your talk. It was beautiful. I explained things very clearly. The nature of imperialism and how it functions, but also the question of what will happen in the near future with Trump. The question I have was, didn't Lenin identify a strata of the working class as the labor aristocracy, and said that these strata workers, which I don't think he was referring necessarily to workers that manufacture things, but more like professional workers at a very higher strata, that they benefit from the imperial plunder of the world. And so they want to defend the status quo, or defend do you see that breaking down, hopefully in some future, hopefully soon, where the economy or something can get this strata lose its hold, or its break out of that and make it easier to organize and I don't know. I'm not trying to excuse the left. I know the left should be. I mean, I don't know if I'm explaining, but you talk a little bit about that group of people that that are holding up the oligarchs.
Yeah. Well, the aristocracy of labor was especially the skilled and the craft unions, and those and the whole idea that the workers in the countries that were colonizing the rest of the planet benefited in some way. They were bought off, and they were a conservatizing factor. Rather than workers of the world unite and identify with those who were colonized who were resisting, they would identify instead with their own ruling class. And that we could see even in this election, that folks who, oh my God, we got to go along with Harris, even though there's a genocide going on, or those who instead said, no, we're not going to vote for either of these parties because they're responsible for this genocide, and we identify with the Palestinian people. So that is gaining ground, particularly among the youth, and in many ways, the aristocracy of labor, as the U.S. Economy is in a downward spiral, and its position globally is going to see their own power shrinking. That is a fact. Okay, my opinion. Okay,
thank you. Up next is David Paul. Hi, David.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, David.
Thanks for being here. I hope this isn't too big or vague of a question, but I'll make it quick. In terms of the solution, which you return to, and I don't disagree with, about it's in the streets. To have a significant numbers, critical mass to actually affect policy change of these imperial rulers, it seems we have to first organize people before you can mobilize them. And what is it do you think that is lacking in the levels of organization? I kind of think that we have to operate on many fronts, local, state elections, organizing in universities, in our communities, getting to all kinds of discussions. But what is lacking in our abilities to organize our neighbors, other citizens, so that we can mobilize enough to be in the streets that make a difference? And I do think no matter how small a little demonstration is, it still has, it's a seed for something greater. I still think there's worth in that. But what has been lacking in our ability to organize enough people to mobilize, then mobilize enough people to make the difference that you're referring to is the solution? Hope that's not too vague or.
Yeah, no, there was no one answer to this. I don't have a quick response. I do think the more we take ourselves seriously and we don't demand to see ourselves reflected in the corporate media that exists to marginalize movements, to say they're insignificant, to not cover them. I mean, when you think of the millions of people who are in the streets for Palestine and around the world, and how little coverage it gets, and especially during the election season, it was on page 10, let's say, of the New York Times or the Washington Post, or the news centers, the things that generate interest. So there's always an attempt to marginalize resistance. And if we look for affirmation of ourselves there, we're going to be disappointed. If we look for affirmation in terms of seeing ourselves as part of a world movement, then every little picket line is a response, and means a lot. It means a lot in Venezuela or in Cuba or in Palestine. It does in Iran, anywhere. The fact when they see workers here opposing their own government, there's great excitement and enthusiasm. Oh my goodness, you know, they're workers, even in the US, even with these arch criminals who are standing up with us. That always excites, and that's good. Builds class consciousness, not only here, but around the world.
Very well said. Thank you. Well, we should all copy that down. So let's go to David Campbell. David, please unmute yourself.
Yes, there we are. Sorry for that. Thank you, Roger, for hosting and facilitating. Sarah, for your presentation and commentary. It's a follow-on question about the role that race played in the recent election, and not disputing our conflicted and challenging history of racism in this country, and let's say much of the world as well. So getting at that point, I was thinking also of what's been referred to and sort of the international aspect of populism. And I'm thinking maybe of Hungary in particular. I just gave a quick look at Hungary and its demographics breakdown. I don't know much of a racial component. I would think it's, if I can just sort of crudely, grossly refer to it as white or mostly white. Of course, there would be an ethnic breakdown, but I think what I saw was Hungary, traditional, or let's say historically Hungarian, were something like 54%. And the breakdown otherwise would be German and Slovenian or Slovakian and Romanian and Ruthenian, I believe. I'm not even sure what that distinction is, but the crux of the question is, if we compare, let's say, racism in America and the role it played in our politics to a country like Hungary that we think of as sort of right-leaning with a resurgence of some sort of nationalism. If we go upstream from racism to what is it that's operating internationally, that's moving people politically, that isn't strictly related to race? How do you think of that?
Okay, first on racism, unless it's challenged, and when it is challenged, think of the Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, that's just, 2, 3, 4 years ago. And by challenging it, challenging the role of the police, challenging the role in hiring and firing and in schools and in the statues and in the culture, really in a very short time, by millions in the streets, literally tearing down the statues or confronting the cops right in the precincts, they pushed back on racism. Did they solve? No, because it's baked into the society. And I don't know a lot about Hungarian politics, but everywhere there is capitalism, it has to create divisions, because you can't have the few who rule and profit unless the workers themselves are fighting among themselves, suspicious of each other. So when socialism was a reality on the ground, at least in the planning, it pushed back a lot of the national oppression that exists in every one of these countries, particularly in Eastern Europe, where there's all different cultures. And so I think the best way to push it back is always to confront the racism and the national oppression. And it's also why it's important to confront anti-trans and anti-LGBTQ and all of these backward ideas. When you confront them and say, no, we're going to speak and act and operate together, then we're stronger. The working class here can see a unity of interest, but only when the ideas of the ruling class are seen and begin to be understood. So now, another thing, though, that the US media does is anyone who's in any way opposing NATO, which Hungary has been doing, they will say is a right wing, this, that, and the other. Now, there are a lot of problems in Hungary right now. But I think the way that a workers' movement should operate is to show the greatest solidarity to those who benefit the least, Romani people especially, within Hungary, those who are coming actually in large numbers from West Asia, driven by war in Syria and so on. So let's keep that in mind. The best way to build unity is to consciously fight the racism, fight the anti-migrant sentiment, which is being whipped up wildly here among workers in the US. They'll tell you they don't have jobs because someone stole it and is being subsidized. We got to confront that and really take it on. And that does the biggest, in my opinion.
Thank you, Sarah. So we're
Thanks
gonna
again, much appreciated.
With Eugene Rule, and then followed by Citizen of the Planet. So, Gene, it's all yours.
Okay. Well, we've touched on China, and you mentioned China a couple of times here. And, you know, some of us people, myself included, see China not just as another country in this global system, but as an entirely new kind of social phenomenon, of social order. And, you know, Stalin talks about, is there a socialist mode of production? And he says, yes, there is. And basically, I pretty well conforms to what China is doing, because it, you know, it is clearly a superpower, but unlike other superpowers, it has not risen to its position by conquering other nations. It hasn't been engaged in any major wars. There was a territorial dispute with Vietnam, I believe, but that was very brief. But it portrays this model, again, as a socialist mode of production. And it's new, and I think part of a hopeful future for humanity. So I just want to throw out that idea for you to comment on. Thank you.
Well, thank you for throwing that out.
I know you've written a lot about China.
Right. And I very much do feel that China is a new socialist model, what they call market socialism. This is a kind of a contradictory but an interesting model. There are capitalists in China, yes, but the big industries in China and all the natural resources and the land in China is socially owned by all the people. That means individual capitalists can't make profits. The banks are owned nationally in China. That makes a huge difference. In the US, at every step, every CEO of a corporation, every board of directors knows if they're not returning a profit that quarter, they're out. It's as simple as that. And it's ruthless. And that drive to return a profit, you invest where the profits are to be made, which is in war, which is in conquest, which historically has been in colonialism. So China is a new social order. They don't need war in order to strengthen themselves, and they actually can use their resources to develop whole parts of the economy that have never been developed, isolated parts of the country. They can make rational decisions. They can say, okay, we're going to end poverty. Now here, everyone knows how to end poverty. I mean, even a child knows how to end hunger, food, you know, but it can't be done because you can't make, under capitalism, rational decisions. You have to only make profitable decisions. China is a new socialist order. I actually did a program last year here with Marxist Forum about China as a new form that also is not driven by, not only not driven by profit, but also does not have the recessions and depressions, 75 years with no depression or really notable recession in China. That means steady development. Life gets better and better, and people expect it to get better. Gets better by wages go up, between 5, even up to 10% a year for everyone nationally. Now here, real wages haven't gone up in 50 years. We can't even picture it. And yet, China is doing something very different, and that's why it is looked to around the world.
Yeah,
and it doesn't impose it.
Initiative.
It doesn't impose it, so it's able to make normal trade relations with other countries that are thoroughly capitalist, that are at a much worse stage of development, but at least trade is normalized. And the working class grows, which means ultimately the ability of the working class to make big life-changing decisions.
Very good. And citizen of the planet, you will be the anchor here.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just want to make a few quick interjections before my question. So please, Sarah, correct me where I might be wrong, but individual capitalists certainly can make money in China. My boss was in China, who's Chinese American. My boss was in China to make money. China has billionaires, which seems to be contradictory to a truly socialist or communist country. My other interjection is that, Ron Dellums turned into nothing but an arrogant establishment Democrat windbag his last years in Congress, bragging about victories he didn't actually materially add. And with the greatest respect, I wanted to go back to what Jean said about a woman president. I think that's romanticizing a woman president. And I meant to give examples before to Eugene about, like Thatcher or Golda Meir, or no value in having a woman president other than as the opponent that we would wish to switch on. No value in having even a Black woman president like Kamala, or for that matter, a Black male president like Obama. The other thing is, so I'm trying to look at my notes here, is that I hope that the Democrat Party will be terminally discredited, especially the Clinton, Biden, Obama, Clyburn Democrats. Sarah, you said this, but there was an old saying, an old quote: "The Democrat Party is where progressive movements go to die." And I repeatedly said that Bernie Sanders was a bait and switch candidate to re-corral disaffected progressives and leftists and deliver them right back to the Democrat Party. Even an AOC turned careerist. Cori Bush, defeated by the Israel lobby, was a Black American representative defeated by the Israel lobby, a once homeless mom with her 2 daughters, then living out of their car, voted for the hundreds of billions of dollars going to Ukraine before she was defeated by the Israel lobby. Back to Bernie. Bernie proclaimed...
Citizen, I'm going to have to say that you're about 2.5 minutes, and this is great stuff. I mean, I don't want to...
With this one last sentence.
So,
Bernie Sanders condemned Maduro as an evil tyrant.
Yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off, but
that's okay. I understand. Thank you.
But Sarah actually has to get going.
I understand. No problem.
But what you're saying is we're gonna have to have another program on these things. So Sarah, why don't you make some final statements and then thank you.
Yeah, well, we could do a program on each of those statements. So first of all, on China, there are capitalists in China who can make profits. There are billionaires, there are millionaires in China. And this is a contradiction that China itself recognized, that the only way forward, because they were completely sanctioned and cut off from all Western trade of any kind, was to open up to the West, allow capitalist development, and at the same time, they sought to control and keep in the hands of the state, of the revolution, and of the Communist Party, the most basic industries that are not owned by a capitalist, or capitalists can have a partial stake, but the decision making is in the hands of the state.
The billionaires don't govern.
Exactly. That's the point. That is absolutely the point. And couldn't have said it better. There is a Communist Party that is more than 90 million strong, that is determined to control this process. And that goes from the schools to every single workplace, has communist cells that have the right to see the books, to examine the managers. And every industry that it develops, that invests in China, must turn over their blueprints, and they can't take their equipment with them if they're pulling out of China. Anywhere else in the world, and right here, whether it's Detroit or Chicago or anywhere in California, capitalists want to leave, they can take everything with them, lay off all the workers, and you're left with nothing. Can't do that in China. So it's a big difference. They made a compromise with capitalism, absolutely, who were the dominant economy everywhere globally and had cut them out. They made a deal, and they've actually stuck by the deal. And yet, because the state has the basic industries, everything from the gold to the oil to the banks to electronics and onward, communications, all kinds of things, it operates in the people's interest. Not in all situations, but there's a real grievance procedure too that operates in the Communist Party and at the grassroots level and on up. Now, on the Democrats, let me just say that Bernie Sanders himself says he was the best recruiter the Democratic Party ever had. He operated as a sheepdog to just get almost a third of the young voters, young workers, were registering as independents. By Bernie Sanders running, they overwhelmingly registered in the Democratic Party. Then he absolutely made a deal and supported Biden. I mean, a criminal, yes, in every way, and said, this is our best option. And he functions that way always. So you can see why, young people wanting change, they were all for Bernie socialism. Yep, that seemed a better option. But they ended up in the Democratic Party, and Bernie Sanders played a real role in that. Now he's critiquing the Democrats for those who want to go further to the right, acting as if he's a spokesperson. It's a fraud, in my opinion. So anyway, those are my responses on
the decision makers were in the hands of the state and South Korean capitalism too, but I don't mean to contradict you, and I really appreciate most of what you said.
Very, very good. And Sarah, do you want to make any final comments or just leave it there?
Yeah, this is an unfinished process. I mean, we could talk all day and talk all night. We don't have all the answers. I think we should have a lot of humility in saying that, but we should know we just got to break out of seeing things from the point of view of here, right now in the US. We got to know it's a system that is sliding down. And the more we operate speaking to the world and knowing what's happening on a world scale, and that drive of people to get out from under of US imperialism, I think we're stronger. We'll have a better view of ourselves. Don't say, oh my God, we're just 10 people in this little town, and they won't even take a picture of our sign. Post it on social media, send it to the world, and someone on the other side of the globe who's fighting a bank in maybe in Chad, in Guinea, in Sudan, would take heart. Wow, there are people who fight there too. So let's see ourselves as part of a larger working class. As Marx said, workers of the world unite, and as Lenin added to it, workers and oppressed. of the world unite.
Thank you very much, Sara Flounders. We're going to look forward to inviting you back here. Thank you, everybody who participated. This was a very good discussion. Wonderful commentary, wonderful questions. Join us next week with John Bellamy Foster, who will be probably speaking on where Sara left off about imperialism and some of the Western Marxists who are kind of soft on that issue. And please follow us on ICSS.marx.org, and we'll see you next week. Thank you very much.
Hold on a second. Janet has a question about copying the chat. Run your cursor over the chat, copy it, and put it on your Word document in your computer.
Some people can't do that.
Yeah.
There used to be 3 dots and then it says copy chat, but I don't.
Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses, since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums. Please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, @yahoo.com, and the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.